We're good to go. Italian, Savina, yay. Okay, well, we'll get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon and welcome to Conversations in Contemporary Art, actually our last event of the season. So thank you for following us along. And yeah, we're so happy to have you here. My name is Hans Lujan Torres, and I am a researcher and administrator and curator here at Concordia University. And I will be your host tonight for our final event, which features esteemed artist, studio arts professor emerita, and actually the founder of Conversations in Contemporary Art, Ingrid Bachmann. Yeah, amongst other things too, I should say. Hexagram co-founder, and yes, so I'll just do a little reminder for those who may be new. Conversations in Contemporary Art, or CICA as it is affectionately known, is a visiting artist lecture series based here in the MFA program in the Department of Studio Arts at Concordia University. It has been running since 2012 with the mandate to bring in artists, curators, and scholars with a variety of practices and perspectives to engage with students and faculty at Concordia, but also the Montreal arts community. So we want to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka are recognized as the caretakers of this island, that's known as Tiohtià:ke, which is also a traditional gathering place for the Algonquin, whose name for it is Noongar, and other Indigenous nations and diverse communities. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relations with Indigenous and other peoples in the Montreal community. So before I hand things off to Ingrid, I'll provide some general reminders. This conversation is being recorded and it will be uploaded on YouTube at a later date. Following Ingrid's presentation, we'll open the floor for a Q&A, and I'll run the microphone up and down to amplify questions. We're going to wrap up around 7:30, and we invite you to join us afterwards for drinks at N Bar. And yeah, let's get started. I'll introduce Ingrid. So Ingrid Bachmann is a multidisciplinary artist who has presented her work nationally and internationally in exhibitions and festivals in Canada, Belgium, the US, Estonia, Singapore, Peru, Brazil, the UK, and Cuba. Exhibitions include the 11th Havana Biennale, Manifestation d'Art International 6, and Hearing, Knowing, Seeing the Body. Bachmann has also made contributions as an editor and writer. She is the co-editor of Material Matters, and she has contributed essays in several anthologies and periodicals, including chapters in The Object Labor, Entangled Bodies, and Cultural Robots, amongst others. Welcome, Ingrid.
Thank you, Hans, and it's so great to see so many familiar faces. I'm really happy to be here and to be here with you tonight. So I wanted to start with a bit of a story. My first memorable experience with technology came at a country fair in southwestern Ontario, where I was raised. Condolences accepted. At that time, a common pastime for families on Sunday afternoons was to go for a drive in the country. Occasionally on these Sundays, one could find traveling country fairs, and some of these fairs included traveling preachers and religious revival tents among the cotton candy and pony rides. At a particularly memorable one, everyone was given a small DIY record player and a very flimsy vinyl disc. The player was made from cardboard, the record needle was a pin, and a pencil was used for the motion. You put the pin into the first groove of the record, used the pencil to turn it around, and apparently you could hear the word of God. Well, I grew in a secular home, so this was especially fascinating for me. Well, I never did hear the word of God. Instead of hearing words, I heard strange and eerie sounds. But it did instill in me a lifelong fascination with technology, in particular with DIY or provisional technology, and the technology of magic employed by amusement parks, traveling circuses, and nomadic evangelical tent preachers. This engraving of a common household flea is one of my absolute favorite images by one of my absolute favorite natural scientists, Robert Hooke, the 18th century scientific experimenter and inventor. Hooke made he was a polymath. He made contributions in the fields of physics, astronomy, biology, and medicine. In 1664, he published his book, Micrographia, a book of observation he'd made using the compound microscope he had recently invented. And at the time, when inventors did invent optic devices, they would often have books with drawings in them to try to sell them to other people. And Hooke was quite remarkable in that he did the drawings himself. So this is actually, you can see this flea at the Rare Books and Special Collections at McGill. It's not this big, it's about this big, but it's one of the largest images in the book. I found it really interesting that he was using among the most advanced technology of his time. And one of the first images he produced with the aid of this device is the image of the common flea. In fact, in Micrographia, he waxes rhapsodic about the beauty and strength of the flea. Mind you, a flea is pretty powerful. It's probably been responsible for more deaths than most wars with the bubonic plague. But that particular interest in the everyday, in the ordinary, and using really advanced technology to explore it. So I feel a special kinship with Hooke as an artist because my work is also fueled by observation and curiosity, and I like to work with new and old technologies and science. My collaborators have included individuals, buildings, seismic shifts, and the wanderings of my hermit crab. In this talk, I'm going to go through some early work, and then I want to talk of some pieces that are really important to me in terms of my development as an artist, then talk a little bit about an idea of community, which I think is really, really important in the arts, and it's also really important as an artist, because I think thinking is a social activity. We're going to talk a little bit about notions of play and experimentation, and then I'll finish off with some more recent work and my most recent project, which is a commission in Cuba, which is pretty exciting. So work. Sometimes it feels like this. Often it doesn't. This was a project entitled A Nomad Web, Sleeping Beauty Awakes, that was exhibited at the Banff Centre of the Arts at the Walter Phillips Gallery in 1992, and it was among the first networked art projects in Canada. This was a time when the internet was an almost totally textual world. There were no graphics, color, or mouse, keyboards. This was pre-browsers, Chrome, Safari, and those things. In fact, the first browser, Mosaic, which was developed by NCSA at University of Illinois at Urbana, wouldn't be released until 1993. And Mosaic is actually credited with making the internet and making the World Wide Web accessible and available. So I was at the Banff Centre, and this new technology, a lot of new technologies were being developed. And I wanted to create a site on this new site. I always am interested in the rhetoric around new technologies because they almost like a biblical or kind of a Western, like New Frontier kind of discourse around them, a space that's free of everything can be totally built on, or kind of a really colonial, in many ways, approach. So I wanted to set up an installation and newsgroup project that served as a forum for the discussion of nomadism in a contemporary context. And the project consisted of physical and electronic sites for the purpose of collecting and sharing dialogues and conversations. And so the host sites were at the Walter Phillips Gallery in Banff, Concordia University here, Side Street Projects in Santa Monica, Cal Arts, Capilano College in Vancouver, and Goldsmiths College in London. One of the things that was important for me, too, is that many of these sites at these different universities and galleries were, the project was located in the fibers department or the textiles department. So in 1993, when I came to Concordia for the first time, the fibers, which at that time was predominantly female students, were among the first to have internet email accounts apart from computer scientists. So that idea of Sleeping Beauty awakes is really, I'm really interested in the stories we tell about ourselves and also about the technologies we use. There was also a lot of information about how to get onto the internet, how you could get an account, and things like that. Another project that was almost simultaneous with this in 1992 was called Talking Walls Dialogue, Ingrid and Plato. And at that point, I was still at the Banff Centre, and there was a really interesting residency called the Bioapparatus, which in many ways was a really kind of changing event for me. And at that point, VR was really popular. I mean, VR is popular now, but those were the early days, and they had these massive helmets that you would put on, and they smelled, and they were sweaty. But the promise of VR was that it would engage the full human sensorium. You could complete immersivity, is that a word? An immersive experience, and also interactivity. So I was really interested in exploring these ideas, but using actually no technology. So I wanted the spectator to literally be in the work, to wear it, cloak themselves in the architecture of the space. And it also began as a rethinking of the gallery space as a place for ideas and a forum, a site to create and initiate dialogue. One of the things that was so interesting, this was shown many places over a period of 10 years, 8 years, I guess. This was at Oboro at the beginning. And so the interactivity, and this was at an exhibition in New York at the end, so the interactivity was very physical. These were columns on pillars, on wheels that you could physically move around, and they had sort of foundational words of Greek philosophy, logos, demos. There were mouths of thinkers that you could move. There were ladders. There were giant chalks. Certain things were silkscreen printed, and certain things were drawn directly on. One of the things, there is a theorist called Florian Retzer, and he talked early on about the invisible walls of software. And I always thought that was a really interesting notion, because in almost all of our technological environments, and many of you who have done some basic programming knows that a lot of programming languages start with if this, then this, end if. And that's actually based on the old Greek deductive logic system called modus ponens, if, then, therefore. And so in this new space, we're actually still really contained by those invisible walls of the software and the values of the people who created it. Another work that I worked on is called Symphony for 54 Shoes. And in that work, I collected 27 pairs of old shoes from secondhand stores, thrift stores, and each shoe has a toe and heel tap attached to it, used in tap dancing. So the shoes move or dance independently of each other. And the mechanical motion of tapping is created using tubular magnetic sensors, which are called solenoids. When they get a charge, they tap down. Because of the weight, the size, how the shoe was worn, it really controls the various kinds of sound. It was really clear for me that I didn't want these shoes to perform for the viewer. These are shoes that had lives, that had history, and in a way, they were trying to say that I am here. Another feature of this work was kind of randomness. There wasn't one particular tap or sequence, and that's really difficult to kind of create, is a real sense of randomness, and also a kind of, an interesting sort of composition or sound experience. So in this way, I was sort of interested in this idea of like tender and even pathetic technology, to really think about technologies to be used for things that are not necessarily productive in the usual sense of the word. This piece, also like many of my works, has gone through many iterations. The first one was done with, I think, Basic Stamp, which is a very old microcontroller, had things hanging from it. A next installation, the one you saw in the video, had another kind of interface. And the final one is using the Arduino and is seamless, it's plug and play. So many of my works, I think, have versions. So there's never really a case of having an original, right? Because I often rework work, I poach things from one piece, use them for another. This next work is called Pinocchio's Dilemma, and it's a series of tongues, very luscious cast tongues that move. And I've always been really interested in stories, and there's the Greek myth of Cassandra, where she really wants to have the gift of prophecy, and only Apollo can give it to her, the god Apollo. So the Apollo comes to her with making sexual advances. She rebuts him, refuses him, and so he turns himself into a wolf surrounded by mice and spits on her tongue. And in the morning, she wakes up with this terrible taste in her mouth, and the gift of prophecy and the curse of never being believed. So Cassandra is also a figure that was also used in terms of early descriptions of hysteria, because when she realized, she predicts the fall of Troy, and no one believes her. There's also this, even though I'm not religious, I seem to know a lot about the Bible. There's this great quote in Acts, which is terrifying, where all of a sudden these burning tongues appear above bushes. And it's like, wow, this is great. So I really wanted to create burning tongues, but I didn't have the level of fame to get away with it in a gallery. So I made these instead, which are, and actually this is the only piece of mine that people have licked, which is its own weird thing. But I really wanted these tongues to be of like the luscious, glorious, like tales, lies, stories. And really, who's to say what's a story or what's a lie? And so this is Pinocchio's nose that moves in and out of the wall to tell which tongues are lying or telling the truth, which is not very accurate. The other thing that has been a part of my work, too, is that I really like to show how things are made. So you could see the back workings of the nose. You could see, if on the side, you could see the servo motors. You could see all the chords. And so there's something about, it's again like that provisional wonder of a circus or a carnival where you are taken away. Hopefully, you're rewarded, but then you also see it unmasks itself. And for me, that's a very important part of my work. The next thing I'd like to talk about is community, and I think it is such an absolutely critical thing in the arts. And I think since COVID, I think we're still recovering from that intense experience of isolation. But I think community in the arts is just absolutely important, and that can be take place in many different ways. This is a project called 48 Hours, 48 Rooms. And in 1998, I moved back to Montreal from Chicago, and I was looking for a place to live, and I met a developer, and the developer said, hey, I've got this old rooming house I'm turning into condos, and I've got this, atrium, and do you want to paint a mural there? And I said, I could paint a mural, but you wouldn't like it. And I said, could you give me the building for a week? And surprisingly, he said yes. And I was really surprised to know that in this fairly affluent neighborhood, there was a rooming house. And in this building, on 2 floors, there were 48 rooms. They were tiny, and they were miserable. And I mean, I know if you go to Japan or New York, scale doesn't necessarily mean misery or bad design. But there were, and so the building itself was so infused with kind of potential. It had so many stories that I didn't feel there was any way to give it a curatorial premise. It already was in it. And so basically, I also worked with Lorraine Odes on it, and we just invited everyone we knew. So there was no fees, we didn't write a proposal. We just went, do you want to do this? People recommend. We ended up with 62 artists. Artists used every single space, showers, fire hydrant holders, and it was up for 48 hours, and we had over 2,000 people attend. And I learned a great deal. I learned much about this show from the show, and one of them was the idea of threshold. Because a lot of people came, it got a lot of press, like public and popular press, and all the doors you can see, they're just ordinary doors. So people felt really comfortable entering into the space. And the room was a scale. It wasn't like glaring lights with a very stern-looking attendant. So there was some really challenging work in there. Nick Forrest, who is here, did a beautiful sound piece. And it was also interesting in terms of the community coming together to make this work. So 62 artists just coming in, working full tilt for a week. And then on the Sunday night, Monday morning, they were already there with the sledgehammers, destroying it. This is a piece that Lorraine Odes did. And to me, it was one of the really, really beautiful, kind of tender piece. She found kind of a very domestic fabric, and she basically slip-covered the entire room. And it was for me, it was such an attitude of care that for the space where people had basically kind of been forgotten. Another work was by Shelley Lowe and Peter Hobbs, who were 2 graduate students at Concordia at the time. And on the floor, you see these kind of nasty mattresses that were left over from the beds. And so they put that on the floor, so when you walked on it, it became like a fun house. And they made this massive celebratory chandelier with just like junk, bibs and bobs from the dollar store. And so that idea, too, of you never know also where joy can be, like what it needs or what it doesn't. This was a piece by Gisela Amatea, and this was a room that had had a terrible fire in it. And she added a few, I think, burn marks, drilled some holes, and put inside each hole a small sound recording device from greeting cards. And so it was a very tinny sound of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And it was such a beautiful expression of hope and possibility after despair. Lorraine and Giselle are here, so if I've really done a bad description of their work, they can take it up with me later. This was a piece I did. It was called Waves as Tall as the House, and I painted the whole room blue. I had this little boat from a Kinder Egg that I painted red, and that was on a motor that went from one side of the room to the other. And around the room was the story of my parents' boat crossing to Canada. And I was thinking when I did the piece that rooming houses generally don't belong to the present tense. People in them are often thinking of the past or of a better future. So this boat that doesn't arrive anywhere and keeps going was important. And also, referenced my parents' journey to Canada, which was, apparently they said there were waves as tall as the house. And so that was important that the blue came over in that. Community too. When in the early 2000s, Hexagram was formed, which was a media institute. Our then dean, Chris Jackson, was very open to things. A group of us, faculty, had started to get together on Wednesday nights and get to talk about, those of us who are working with technology, and got together to talk about our work and share our work. And so he heard about it and he said, okay, let's maybe see what we can do with this. He was a huge Francophile, so right away he got UQAM involved. And so this Media Arts Institute was formed. And it really started with incredible kind of promise and a lot of access. So I was fortunate, as one of the founding members, I was fortunate to get a studio there. And when they came to say, well, what's the name of your studio, your lab? I said, well, it's a studio. And they said, no, you don't have a studio, you have a lab. So then I decided, well, okay, I'm going to have the Institute of Everyday Life. And so I became an institute. And then because we were an institute, we had to have proper lab coats and jackets. So these were the graduate and undergraduate research assistants that I worked with, AFO, the Dana Delbo and Pal Thayer. And that was really, so we each designed our own. Françoise was very regal, so she did hers. Dana's very fashionable. Pal's, you can't really see, it's real 70s hipster. And mine, because I like to draw on Post-it notes. So that opportunity to be able to work with graduate students and undergraduate was really, really fantastic because there is that kind of camaraderie, the sharing of ideas. We also did an exhibition in Holguin, Cuba, and workshops, and this is a silly photo. But that idea of fun, I think of joy is so important, and I think it's really hard. We live in really difficult times. And I think being able to have joy can be kind of political because it has a certain call to action in it too. But this was also another project setting up people conversation. The other thing, in terms of, I think teaching was also a really interesting part of being part of a community. It was something I really liked to do. It wasn't only I didn't do it because I had to do it. It was something that I enjoyed and I was able to have all my activities. And I was actually able to do this one lecture series called The Defined Imagination, and to me and then later on started SICA. Patrick Traer and I were having a conversation and we're thinking, we don't have a lot of visiting artists programs, so how are we going to, we don't have a lot of money, how can we secure a visiting artists program? And so there was a program called Art Now at the University of Lethbridge, and they had their lecture series attached to a class. So we thought, okay, this is a good way to do it. So SICA was then formed and was attached to a seminar as well. And we were able to, bring in a lot of different people. And often we partnered, as I'm sure you're doing now with the Musée des Beaux-Arts, Musée d'Art Contemporain, Ober, different galleries. And so it was and it was also, I think it was really seen as a site for the studio arts community to be together. And I think that idea of community, I can't really stress it. I think I know we're in the art world now that it's really market driven, and so everything is quite competitive. And I think, this idea of community is still really important. So play and experimentation. And so that continued in the studio. On the lower left is the late, great Martin Peach, who I had the good fortune of working with for 15 years as a collaborator and a dear friend, and whom I miss so much and feel he just offered so much to me and to probably every electronic and media artist in Canada who came through Concordia. But this was kind of the studio, the way it looked. And it's my studio now is a little neater because I'm in a new studio. It's Atelier Belleville. And I actually decided to move there because it's also based on a community, sort of idealism. It was owned by artists, and rents are secure. And to me, that's something really important, partly because I was forced to move out of my studio many times, but also that spirit. But anyway, so the idea of the studio as just a place of kind of play. So there's all different, all the tests for the tongues, all the different ways of doing things, different models for mechanical motions. This piece is one of those experiments that went really far but then didn't go anywhere. I worked on a project for 14 years that I'll talk about a little bit later called Hybrid Bodies, and it was a collaboration between artists and an interdisciplinary medical team to look at the non-medical effects of transplant in heart transplant recipients. And so one of the things found from this research that the experience of heart transplant is very, very interior. The recipients will have a scar, but it's usually covered by clothing and it does heal. So they've gone through this really traumatic experience because someone has to die in order to have a heart donated. And then there's a lot of very interesting emotional and psychological things that occur after. loss of or shift in identity. So I thought, okay, I collect stones, rocks, I think many people do. So I had some rocks 3D printed, and then had some of the stories of the transplant recipients recorded, put into these little boxes, and then what you see there is a transducer, which is used in a lot of hearing aids, and it's a device that allows you to hear not through the outer ear, but through the middle and inner ear, and so it actually conducts sound through your bones. So the first time you hear it, it's quite eerie, because you hold it to your nose and you can hear these really intimate stories that are, but also very, very private. Now, of course, the problem with this one is, it's like no one wanted to show it, because someone could steal it. And then also the other problem was how to charge it. Never figured that one out. Had tried all sorts of things. So sometimes, oh well, things happen. And I think that's also an important thing. The piece did end up in this iteration. This was a show in Australia, and they're still using the transducers.
I'm great. I'm feeling great. Really great. But I'm great. But I'm great. They see me as normal. They see me as normal. Like a normal person. Like a normal person. I am better than before. But pain is pain. I have dreams. I am somewhere and I can't get out. In my dream, I am invisible to others. Colors are so bright. It was not.
I'll stop there. And so they were. The other thing, as Hans mentioned, is I have written, and I usually don't mention it, but I thought, well, it has been an important part of what I do, even though I don't like it because it's so difficult and painstaking. But Material Matters, which was a book that came out in 1999 and was republished in 2000. It's going to be reprinted again this fall with 4 new essays, so an update. So that's kind of exciting. But what's interesting is all of these things kind of run between textiles and technology, like robotics or science and textiles. And of course, that link is kind of now quite well known. But and the writing for me has never been before my work or after the work. It's just something that's a parallel practice. And sometimes things from that practice kind of leaks into other ones. Now a little more work. With this piece called Pelt Bestiary, I often had the feeling that technology is naked and that it had drifted from its animal roots. So in Pelt Bestiary, I wanted to give digital technology back its fur, to bring the bestial and the messiness of the world back into the realm of digital technology, and also to continue my work in grounding kind of digital experience in the material realm. So, like everything that's technological is sort of smooth and shiny, and so this came a little bit from that, and I wanted to make a surface that was very much like fur, but that was very synthetic at the same time. So that relationship between natural and unnatural was there. And so I made a collection of beasts. This was from a show in Sao Paulo. And they all moved ever so slightly, most of them. Some were interactive, some were kinetic, some didn't move at all except for the ventilation of the room or things like that. And it was really important for me. This was a time when there was a lot of interactive work. So if people thought a work was interactive, they'd just start beating it or jumping in front of it. And so this idea of how to keep this engagement, but also how to have these things that are sort of, to me, very, I mean, I see them as almost alive, and that there's this attention to them. And so the movements were very, very slow and had really different characters. So in this particular iteration, that one, it sort of had like a cat, the tail would sort of snap. I decided to draw portraits of giant portraits of the beasts. So we looked at them, and they looked at themselves and each other. The project that I mentioned earlier called Hybrid Bodies was a 14-year-long project that began in a really interesting way when this medical team, clinical researchers, approached 4 artists to work on the study with them. Usually artists are kind of looking for opportunities to find something. And it was a great experience. It had to be so long because we could only meet once or twice a year in Toronto. And so people had to travel. Also, it took 2 years to get through ethical approval to work with their data, which was in the form of video interviews. And we also took years to get funding because when we went to CHIR, which is the medical funding, and to SSHRC, they said it was too interdisciplinary. So anyway, it worked out, and it was probably a really fantastic experience. This is some members of the team, and that's the Peter Monk Cardiac Centre in Toronto. And it was so interesting to work with Dr. Heather Ross, who's the head of the centre, and who felt like, in a way, she was doing career suicide during this kind of project. I mean, she's a hard scientist. And she just felt that she wanted to do something that would make her patients better because heart transplantation is now almost a routine medical procedure, but the effects after had never really been addressed, the emotional and psychological effects. So, and how they found this out was through the video interviews where people said, I'm great, but their body language is like, I'm great. So that was that was a project that went alongside my other work too. And because Heather had taken such a risk, I felt I wanted to do that too. And I wanted to work with 2 dancers because everything about the transplantation is about a dyad. It's the healthy heart, the declining heart, the body needing the heart, the body rejecting the heart, issues of identity, the fear of touch. And so these performers, Linnea Gviazda and Maxine Sigalovitz, we used one of the dance studios at Concordia, and I gave them sort of prompts from the various stories and kind of came out with this video. It's interesting that the next project has a really different kind of feeling. It's called The Angry Machine. And I like that idea of, as I said before, emotional machines that you can kind of touch or feel, or that are maybe not totally functional like the shoes in The Angry Machine. And I was angry. And in many ways, I'm still angry about many things. But I was thinking about anger as a force, not rage, but as a force to kind of propel change, whether it's social change, community change. And so this machine that I built this cage around because we needed to be protected from it. And the actual machine was based on I've always wanted to make an angry machine, but there was also when I was a kid, we used to play this game where you'd put a ball in a stocking. This is how old I am. Yeah, I just discovered this, that I am no longer young. It's been quite a shock. But then you used to get, and then you'd do a rhyme, and then you'd like throw this ball under your arms between your legs, and if you hit yourself, like it hurt. So I really liked this idea of this game that was also painful and also fun, I guess. Now I can't really see it. And in a way, the Angry Machine, it just sort of explodes. It just gives this little explosion where the ball and the red stocking kind of goes out. So in some ways, it's anticlimactic. But I also wanted that. I didn't want it. I shouldn't really have cut that off. Many of my pieces are the result of a lot of people's labor and work. And on my website, I credit all of them because I think that's really important. It's something in the arts we tend not to do enough of, is unlike film, where that's a really big part of the work. This one, during COVID, I was commissioned to make a piece by Casey Messick Brown, the curator at the Spencer Museum of Art in Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas. And it was for a show called Knowing, Healing, and Seeing the Body. And I was thinking about a piece, but another piece that was supposed to be in the show couldn't be in because it used touch, so you actually couldn't see it. So I was really thinking about touch and the lack of it, the loss of that during COVID. So I wanted to make a piece that would give the experience of touch without physical touch. So kind of trying to create a field of a material and sound. It's a two-part piece that was kind of call and response, these really large felt, almost elephant legs that have speakers in them. And then this felt that was piece that was on the floor that had speakers sewn into them. I really wanted the piece, the sound to come from the piece itself. And I thought of felt and copper and as really kind of healing kind of things. So I used a pentatonic glockenspiel, which is like a little xylophone, but it has 7 notes in 1 octave, and it's often used with kids or infants to introduce them to music because there's no dissonant sounds. So I recorded it both with the metal hammer and with the rubber hammer, and then worked with Martin Peach, and it was put into a program called Cellular Data, which made sure that the sounds moved equally through all these speakers. And that was really, really important, that you, again, couldn't attach a sound to a speaker. It wasn't a composition. It was trying to create kind of a really embodied experience. I never saw the show or the work. That's why I don't have any video of it. And this is how the speaker is made. It's an Archimedean spiral that's embroidered onto felt. There's a magnet attached to the back that kind of creates the vibration. And wires are from the starting end of this spiral to the end are then attached to an amplifier, to a tsunami board. And I worked with Jen Moissin in the Milieu Textiles Lab on the Tajima machine, so it was a lot of fun. Well, it was a lot of work, but anyway, that's always the case. The last project I want to talk about is the most recent one that I'm working on and it's taking place in Matanzas in Cuba. It's a city between Havana and Veradero. It's a beautiful little town, not as big as Havana, but a great cultural community. And there's a gallery there called Gallery Taller, and its founder is Osmani Lolo Betancourt, who's an artist in his own right, and also he does a lot of public sculpture, but also has a ceramic studio. This is the metal studio. There's also a bronze foundry, and there's a little area that's a gallery and a store. And I met him by chance 2 years ago, and a lot of things in my work have happened kind of by chance, by talking to people, meeting people. And I'm not saying that to be glib. It really has worked out that way. And he invited me, well, actually, Wojtek, my partner, I'd come to see his studio, and we did. And it's like, okay, this is kind of great. He said, well, if you want to make a piece here, just come down and we'll do it. And so COVID happened, so it got put on hold. But last year, I went in November, and we started to work on a piece together. And I've learned so much about working there because, again, in Cuba, materials are really, really difficult to find. You can't go to a shop and buy things. So all of the materials here were found or recycled or scavenged or salvaged. And so, I decided, for some unknown reason, to make a giant skirt. Yes, my first outdoor public sculpture, and I want to make a skirt. I was thinking about the little, the little mechanical ballerinas you would see in jewelry boxes that were often given to little girls. And they had these big, like, super femme skirt and then these spindly little legs and pretty much nothing else. And so, I don't know, for some reason I just thought of this. And, I'd never worked on an outdoor sculpture, and also in this way of working where I'm working with someone. I usually, work through the process myself. But anyway, so arrived there, get off the plane, and all of a sudden we're already shaping the metal. And, they don't have a metal machine. They just have two really strong men, a mallet and an anvil, and off we went. So this was the base for the machine, for the skirt. And then because I wanted movement, I mentioned it, so they found a part from a truck. I don't know what part it was. And so they attached that to this top, and then that was attached to the top of this. Then for the skirt, everything there is cut metal that makes the structure for it was found. It was such a great learning experience, and one that I really want to take forward with me in my work. Then for the skirt, here I think I would have gotten a sheet of metal, maybe cut pieces, had it fixed. And there's this roofing material that's very common there. So that was used to kind of fabricate the skirt. And I ended up really liking it because it had the skirt, but it also had a certain sculptural monumentality. The piece is called Beauty and in the Beast. And I was really interested in a particular telling of Beauty and the Beast by the late English writer Angela Carter, and in this wonderful collection of stories, she tells, the story of Beauty and the Beast. But in this case, when Beauty returns to the Beast, as soon as she enters the palace, her jewelry falls off, her robes sort of slip away, and she begins to be covered by this soft fur. And in it, that story is really this idea of her kind of sexual awakening and ownership of her sexual body. And so I wanted to make a piece that was, that had both animal and human, and not in the kind of binary of often a traditional binary, so in the same body. So this is above the goat hoof is this sort of white, again, pelt-like fur. This was moving this piece. It was quite something. I'm really very, very honored. And then painting it, and then I brought some window screen from here to use as sort of the crinoline. And I also like the fact that when this piece is over, the piece, if they can keep it, obviously if the public likes it, but other than not, then all of it can be recycled and reused. I think you can see on the left, one leg is the leg of a dancer, the other leg is the leg of a goat. And so those were made in clay and then cast in fiberglass. And on the left is, on the leg of the dancer is kind of the form of a prosthetic. So I really wanted to mix things up a bit, and the white you saw earlier will go on top of the scout like. I'll go back in November to finalize the work and to bring other work, but this is an amazing team, Waldito and Amel, both, Waldito is a really interesting artist in his own right. This is this just remarkable team that I worked with. Lolo is on the left, who is sort of the impresario of this really just remarkable group of people, including to my right, one of Cuba's really famous satirists and journalists and artists who works in the studio, Helga Montalban, who's a really interesting curator and feminist artist. So an experience that is really, really rich and really humbling. So I'm going to end because I think this is useful with an instructional video, because what better way to end a lecture than that? Thank you very much.
Charlie, can we have the lights on, please? Thank you. Thank you so much, Ingrid. That was so wonderful to hear about your work and so many diverse and rich projects that you've done. I guess I'm going to invite the audience to think of your questions to ask Ingrid, and we're so fortunate to be able to ask you these questions. I'm kind of curious about your relationship with technology and your projects, and perhaps more of this question is more about your process. I'm curious, how do you find the right technology to communicate the concept? It's a very poetic idea that you end up executing. Is it something that you encounter first and then you find the right the right technology, or how does that work for you?
No, regrettably, I don't find the technology first. I have the idea and then I try to find a way to make it work. And it's really, it's a good thing. I like the idea of play and experimentation because there's so much of it. But sometimes it is something that I see. I don't know where I saw those the sensors, for transmitting sound, and I just knew I wanted to work with them. And so a lot of things sort of build in that way. I mean, many of my works, I didn't show them today, they're completely obsolete and redundant, including, the catalog for 48 Hours, because it was a CD-ROM and it's on what's it called? Flash, so that's gone. So no, I usually work backwards. Not recommended.
Fair enough. Do we have any questions from the audience? I can keep going. I'm finding that in your presentation, it seemed like a lot of the, there's this concern on the body, or this attention to the body and the experience, and these corporeal experiences. But it seemed like as the work developed, or your practice developed, it kind of kept going in and deeper into the body, to how you experience things corporeally and your emotions. And I'm wondering if that's maybe the narrative, if that is intentional, or if that's something that you've been actively trying to get deeper and deeper into the body, or if that's just kind of how it's developed.
I think it's a bit of both. Yeah. And I think what we do ends up being a kind of subconscious intention. But I think the idea of just this idea of material matters, which was the name of the book, and this idea of needing this investment in our material world. And the myths of technology are always about transcendence. And even AI, everything is sort of invisible. So this idea of the body, embodiment and experiencing the body. And now, one of the things I learned from the Hybrid Bodies Project that's really interesting was, at first we called it hybrid, but it's really wrong term, because a hybrid suggests a union, right, between two, and it becomes something new. The bodies are actually amalgams. And I think that's a much more interesting kind of metaphor, because it allows the different parts to remain true to themselves, and that the join, which is never easy, is visible, and that's the whole thing with heart transplant, like with restoration in the West. You want to make it seamless, clear-cut, looks like it's always been there, but that's a really incredible political act when you deny the scar or the suture, whether it's on a building, on a person, on an experience. So yeah, I think, and also, yes, I do think that it has been intentional.
Yeah, I mean, it's really beautiful to hear you talk about your work as well, and this kind of revealing the magic of technology. And I kept thinking, there's you're kind of demonstrating the spirituality of technology, but I know that you kind of mentioned, this, it's not a religious thing, but it kind of has this very, not ethereal, it's hard to find the right word for it, which is ultimately, when it comes down to the body, it's a very human sort of wonderness.
I think that's something really important for me, that idea of wonder and the sublime, but not the sublime of Caspar David Friedrich, looking out over a mountain, or the sublime that is about forgetting, but it's about like the provisional sublime, the sublime that shows. But I think that desire, that space of the imagination, and is really powerful, and even politically, it's how ideas get started, and also communities form. So it's really how to kind of reclaim, and these are tough times, how to reclaim kind of wonder as something that's very different than escape, which is what technology is really about mainly, a way to distance. And also some of it is, Julie and I were talking about it earlier, is just that, how isolated people have come, how technologies have really isolated us. And so, yeah, it's really funny that I am so interested in the body, but it's not a body, it's like human bodies, animal bodies, machine bodies. And I've been really interested in the way the Japanese culture looks at human-animal-machine relationships. So they have a monk who's a robot, automaton, Mindar, who teaches Zen to people. And what's so interesting is that it's like the robotics are so sophisticated there. He's got a really highly developed humanoid face, gender not specific, eyelashes, things that move, but then his neck and the rest of his body are all animatronics apart from his hands. So there's never any question that this isn't a machine. So it's not pretending to be. So that whole sense of mimeticism and mimesis is not really there. And there's also the Shinto tradition of believing that there's life in anything. And this robot actually asks you, like the Buddha says, a machine could be alive. And so there's something in that I think I kind of like to get at in my work. And I think those things have a lot of, ecological and environmental, how we treat the living things around us and how we view things as living is really, really important.
Yeah, and the non-living things is kind of,
Yes,
I guess, Western and colonial perspective on machines being there to serve humans. Yeah,
actually,
exactly.
That's in Socrates. He talks about slaves, human slaves, as machines. So there's a real history in the West, of machines being used in the power of humans. And so that is so rooted in there. It's sort of shocking to read those things. And so you realize all those values are really deeply entrenched.
Yeah, wow. Sit with that a little bit. I guess I'm also curious. This is kind of a homecoming for you,
Yeah.
not just at Concordia, but here at SICA. We have to say we wouldn't be here without you and this development that you did. So thank you first for that. But I'm curious, in your discussions on community, you showcased some really beautiful projects that you were able to do here in Montreal. But I'm curious about your experience as a professor here at Concordia. How did you find that influenced your work? And maybe is there?
I think, of course, it did. You know, I think I was always fortunate that I never really taught what I did. So I think that kept my work kind of free in that way. But also when I came back here in 1998, you know, studio arts was smaller. Like, it wasn't smaller, but the dean's office was where the studio arts office, administratively, it was so much smaller. So when I did the 48 Hours project, the dean at the time, Chris Jackson, said, "Oh, that's cool. Can we help?" I said, "Yeah, we need insurance." He said, "Oh, we can underwrite it for you." Great. Then they set their little PR machine and whatever. And so it was, more things seemed possible, and I feel that in more recent years, things seem less possible and there's more blocks. And I think that physical distance of the buildings and maybe the growth of the admin. But teaching it really keeps you honest. Like, you think you're really smart, and then you're like some whippersnapper student and all these amazing things, or just calling you out on things. So I also felt it kept me from being lazy, you know, because I had to be really up on things, you know, and that's really good. And I think I really, I enjoyed it, and I think I think teaching is a very reciprocal thing, and I think all I ever did in teaching was try to bring out what the mostly amazing students I worked with had already in them. So So yeah, it was hard though. Like, and what's the new system they have now that I've already forgotten? Oh, my God! Like,
Collective
how
sigh.
to kill creative life. So, I mean, I think there has been a bit more. I think COVID did such a number. And then I think maybe there's an increased bureaucratization of art too, that makes it difficult. And that's why I think it's really important that those sort of paths of resistance. And I think play is a resistance. Like, we're urged to be productive. Like, how much are you producing? How much did you do? How much work? Don't do anything. Do nothing. Like, the world's not going to collapse. Do it when you're ready. And that idea of exploration, like, I just think that's so key, because really that's when things happen. I mean, anytime I've thought, oh, this is a great idea, I'm going to do it, no. You know, yeah.
We have a question?
Whenever I look at your Post-it notes, they really sort of resonate as kind of cocktail napkin fodder for ideas. And I wonder if you could talked about some things that the practicalities of a gallery made them maybe a failure. That's not the right word, but they couldn't be shown appropriately. I wonder if you could talk about a process where you have an idea and how you have to veer and shuffle and move to make it work, because you seem really adaptable in the way you have ideas and you draw in from past works. I wonder if you could give us some examples.
Sure. I mean, I also am happy to talk a little bit about Post-it notes, because that's one of the things I do. I have thousands of them when I'm not working on anything. And I think it's really important for everyone, like, to have a practice that you can do wherever, whenever, costs no money, you can take with you, lets you get ideas out, and so I can. Yeah, it's really, I think, I just plunge in, and I didn't show them, but my work usually starts with a drawing, an image that I kind of want to see. And then there's a lot of conversation, especially if there's areas that I don't know how to do, and research. And sometimes it's a lot of time looking for materials. And those things I find are kind of the really enriching part of it. And then other ideas spark. I read a lot. I get a lot of ideas. I walk a lot. Walking is also something. But I don't think I'm really answering your question. I think some of it is like trial and error. I try something, it fails, try something else. I ask someone, I get some, try that. Does that answer? Not really. Okay. I bumble along, basically.
I wonder, would you consider those Post-it notes sketches, or are they journal entries for you? Like, how do you view them in relation to your practice?
I think I view them a little bit as journal entries because I know where I did all of them. I usually always do them. So there's different countries, different places, different cities, different apartments that I recognize. And I don't really know quite what to do with them. I do to make videos of them, like that one, and every now and again. I used to make a New Year's video every year, but then I got kind of depressed by world politics and everything that I didn't like it. So yeah, they're quite important part. And also, I find it keeps my hand in shape because I do like to draw, and drawing is an important part of it. And it's a way of keeping that kind of way of thinking, but I do see it as a journal. And I do have a number of other kind of rule-based works, like the Post-it notes have to be with this particular pen, Uniball pen, on yellow Post-it notes, and they have to be of something where I am or something that's close to me. It sometimes can be in a book. I also sometimes paint on cardboard 3 by 5 inches in black and white, only things that are architectural. And then sometimes I collect things on a day and put them in bottles, so maybe that's too much confession. I think so. But I think there are those things that kind of, that are a kind of form of sketching, actually.
Do you have any other questions to ask Ingrid? Yeah.
Hi, Ingrid. So grateful to see your work like in a span, and that kind of aroused my question. It's so interesting to see how you change and you shift through the years through technology. Like you're clearly a pioneer in this field, especially in this city. And I'm just curious to ask you, like, how do you feel like as an artist to be like 30 years in the field of new media, especially when it was being made, and how technologies kind of change your way of thinking, but also how discourses change, because now we're like locked in the Anthropocene. 10 years we're locked into memory and territory. I imagine in the 90s it was like surfing the web or something, I don't know, like losing your body. And how do you feel those changes, and in the theory and in the technology in your own work, and how you navigate that for now and the future, I imagine?
It's a really good question because, I mean, a few years ago, the Canada Council moved my work from media arts to visual arts because it was too material. And yet, you know, you strip those beasts of their fur and you've got a good little machine there. So I'm finding it, like right now, like there's a lot about AI and a lot about crypto. And I really think it's important for artists to engage in these new spaces. I'm not sure. I've always been more interested in artificial life as a model as opposed to AI, artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence tends to use the human as a model and tends to view things in isolation. And A-Life has always looked at bodies like usually ants or bees or things that live in colonies that are social and that can evolve. But of course, that isn't the dominant model for looking at AI. And AI, I feel there's a lot in there, but I think it's maybe not for me. In crypto, what I'm kind of interested is in cryogenics. So I'd have a project with my hermit crab, who I didn't show because I would just talk all night about Pookie. He's late. But I sort of would like him to be, I'd like to say he's frozen in a cryogenic facility in Arizona. And I think that would be a lot of interesting terrain to kind of do a kind of piece about that. I'm sort of negotiating that now because I want to work with less technology in the work, actual technology. I want to work more with found materials. I'm really interested in trying to find other alternatives like solar power, wind power, mechanical motion. I feel like now I want to pull back. And I think right now there are so many different things that it's hard to say. It's a question I'm really asking myself now. And I'm wondering how you would answer that, because you're obviously working with it and really interested. You have a show up right now, don't you? It's still up? Worth going to see. Because I do think there's something about, part of me is holding back a bit. And if I jump into another technology, if I want to make sure it's for the right reasons.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Just warming, so I know how good it is. But anyway, so when a lot of your that work of the past was sort of in Concordia and with the help of SHRC and other kind of funding. So how are you thinking about that in terms of just supporting or like without that larger scientific kind of?
Well, you know, for many years I didn't have that support too. That was like a little bubble. And I have to admit, it was kind of great. I felt I did have to shift a bit to write those grants and maybe lie a little bit, like how I was contributing to Canadian society. Well, you know, but no, I have to admit, I love the fact of having a studio, and I kind of wish, you know, when I was in Matanzas and we were working with Lolo, and he's just created this incredible space for so many people. Like, there are interns, and I kind of wish I could do that. I don't, because I really like that. I feel in some ways I'm working at Atelier Belleville, and that's a cooperative studio. Not a cooperative, but it's a members. And so there's a lot of machinery and tools and things that are shared. So, and there's also the social aspect. We have a little kitchen, make coffee, and it's not like we hang out, but there's always this possibility of these random exchanges, which are just so important. And so, yeah, so I'm doing, the work is, now I'm working at this project in Cuba where I have this incredible team making work with me and for me. But I think the shift to a smaller scale and to what I can do is actually interesting. Sorry.
You write those grants, you have to think about sort of big things, you know what I mean? You have to frame them in a certain way. So it's
I was kind of smart, I think, in one way, is that I never wrote for something I didn't want to do.
No, of course.
And I also wrote them really vague so that I had a lot of freedom. And so that was, to me, the real key. And so I think they're a really mixed sort. I have to admit, I don't like the word research creation. I think artist is just fine. And I don't like those grants are terrible because, your work counts for nothing. So it's really all about the writing. And, I have written quite a bit. So in a way, it was easier for me. And I just made sure, it's like a double life. I never wrote anything very exacting.
I'm not accusing you.
No, but it was really tough. And you do feel a bit like, and there's certain words like deliverables. I never use that word. But no, there is that. But I found I could use them. That the early days, they said, you can never get a grant as an individual. It has to be a team. Well, I did. So that was good. And often I was told, like, oh, you won't get that. And I did. So I didn't always. But I think the most important thing is to do work whenever, wherever. And I think that kind of social, I'm sort of getting in my new studio situation. I have a wonderful studio mate, Shelley, who keeps me entertained and in check. And I think that's really important. So that's been important. And the work will just be what it will be. I'm working on some drawings, which I haven't done before. So I think it's important to work with whatever you have. So it might be like people moving things around, like, me pushing things with on a stroller or something, I don't know. But it will work out. It is different though, and but then I haven't had one for a while, but I did really love that part of working with, being able to pay well research assistants too, and to have that not so much as labor, but as a community, and also kind of just, sorry. Give yourself a heart attack, sort of experimenting together. It wouldn't be appropriate for me not to knock something over. So, yeah, but it is a big shift. So, next year, yeah.
Oh, let me just pass you the microphone. Just for the recording.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ingrid. This is just wonderful because I've known you since I was a graduate student, and
Yeah.
and I still see you as a mentor for me, and as much as a friend and colleague at Concordia. Just wanted to say that because this is very special to be here today and have that opportunity to see you. And also to talk about your work over many years to see how it's evolved. And obviously, I'm also now in a position to maybe talk about your work from the perspective of the new materialist turn in the way that we see the relation between human and the non-human. I just wanted to point that out because I think as much as the work is mechanical, sort of in an automated kind of way, and there's a long history with that, obviously, and the whole understanding of how things work in a mechanical way. What I think is so interesting also is how now your work is moving into a very transdisciplinary approach. And I find that really, truly authentic in the way that you're speaking always somehow about what it means to be human on a very beautiful way. But at the same time, I think it's also moving into the social sciences and into the humanities, which is an area that maybe needs to be talked about a lot more often within academia, and closing those gaps between visual arts and the understanding that community is also part of the big conversation.
Thank you, Julieta. It's really true. I mean, that new materialism has been a really big interest of mine. And I do think because I have worked with, like, geologists, seismologists on a project I didn't show, and others, that talking across disciplines, and that's like how we talk to each other. Oh my goodness, how we have to learn to do that, like on every level of society in the world now. But thank you so much. That was nice.
Any final questions? I think we're good. Thank you, Ingrid, for this very honest and I think the conversations about grants and artist practices are so valuable right now, especially with students here, because it's just the reality of it. How do you find opportunities for yourself and support yourself as an artist in a very shifting landscape of support? So I will wrap it up. If everyone wants to join me in clapping for Ingrid.
Thank you.
We just want to also thank Vitaly, who's our tech, and Sabina, who's been recording. Yeah. And just as we close, as this is our last SICA event of the season, we just want to thank Maya Ray Oppenheimer, who's our convener and has been our convener this year and for, I think, 4 or 5 years now. Who's really done so much with this program and who couldn't be here today, but has been so active in not just Ingrid's talk, but all the talks we've had this season. So just a round of applause for Maya as well, who will hopefully see this. All right, we're going to go to NBAR if anyone wants to join us, and we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Hans.